Good evening, everyone. My name is Saul Zia, and I will do a brief introduction of myself shortly. But before we commence tonight's panel on racism and discrimination in the workplace, I want to take a moment to acknowledge that we reside and work on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Nations, which includes the Siksika, the Piikani, the Kainai. We also acknowledge the Tsuut'ina and the Stoney Nakoda First Nations, the Métis Nation Region 3, and all people who make their homes in Treaty 7. But further, I'd like to ask all of you to join in a moment of silence to acknowledge the death of 215 innocent Indigenous children at the residential school in Kamloops, British Columbia, and to mourn for the 4 innocent lives lost in London, Ontario on June 6, 2021, simply due to their ethnic background and religion. We'll now pause for a moment of silence. Thank you. I'm pleased to be the moderator for this panel on racism and discrimination in the workplace. I'm Saul Zia, and I lead the Calgary Hotel Association, which does represent one of the most diverse workforces in Calgary. As we are emerging out of the pandemic, I invite all of you to staycation at any hotel in Calgary as we open for summer, just to see how diverse our hotels are, from the front desk to housekeeping, food and beverage, and banquets. Those who identify as visible or disabled represent over 60% of the workforce in Calgary hotels. Before I pass to opening remarks to Minister Jason Copping, just a few housekeeping rules. I think this meeting is being managed very well, but just in case, if you are not speaking, to please mute your device unless asking a question. I'm now going to pass the floor to Minister Jason Copping for additional remarks. Go ahead, Minister Copping.
Thank you very much, Sol, and thanks for the recognition and taking a moment of silence. I want to thank everyone for joining us here today, and I also want to take a moment, and I know we'll do this at the end as well, but I want to thank the organizers, Sol, Mehan, the sponsors, TD for this event, and I truly want to thank my fellow panel members, some exceptional speakers and exceptional people, Anila, Yuen, Dr. Sally Zhao, Anne-Marie Pham. These are individuals who work tirelessly on improving diversity and work tirelessly on inclusion and eliminating discrimination day in, day out. So I want to thank you very much for joining me here tonight and participating in this event. Sadly, racism has existed and continues to exist in Canada and Alberta. Recently, we've seen a number of heartbreaking examples. As already mentioned, the murder of the Muslim family in London, Ontario, the discovery of the remains of 215 children at the Kamloops Indian Residential School. We've seen attacks on Black Muslim women in Alberta over the recent months, and incidents of hate against Asian communities during the pandemic. And this list goes on. But through workshops such as these, we can talk about how to address discrimination and racism in the workplace and in Alberta society. We can talk about how we can improve inclusivity, diversity, and fairness at work and at home, and make our society a more welcoming place. So I very much look forward to our discussion tonight, the hearing from our expert panel, and I want to thank you very much for including me on behalf of the Government of Alberta and the Ministry of Labour and Immigration, and thank you all for joining us tonight. And with this, I'll pass it back to you, Sol.
Thank you, Minister Copping. I will now pass the floor to our legacy sponsor, TD Bank, and Mr. Frank Zhang, who's prepared video remarks to all of you. We'll now play the video introducing Mr. Zhang.
Hello, everyone. My name is Frank Zhang, and I'm the manager of Essential Mortgages with TD here in Calgary. TD is very proud to sponsor this evening's event. We stand united with all Asian communities, and we are all working to combat anti-Asian racism. At TD, we recognize that diversity represents one of our greatest strengths. That's why we have been always a strong supporter for all Asian communities, customers, colleagues for many years. Thank you for letting me be a part of the event tonight. I look forward to the discussion on discrimination in the workplaces. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. and thank you to everyone. I'd now like to introduce each of our panelists, who will each present their remarks to you on the topic of this panel. As Minister Copping has already thanked all of our panelists, we do have a very prestigious panel today led by Minister of Labour and Immigration, Jason Copping. Jason is the MLA for Calgary Varsity and was appointed Minister of Labour and Immigration on April 30th, 2019. Minister Copping has over 20 years of senior management experience in labor relations and human resources and corporate affairs. Working in the transportation industry, he led teams in the development and implementation of labor relations strategies, negotiated and administered collective agreements, and represented management in labor arbitrations cases. He's taught labor relations at the University of Calgary and labor and employment law, as well as human resource management at the University of Lethbridge. His extensive background in labor relations makes him very well positioned, clearly, in Alberta's government with labor and immigration, create more jobs, deliver on fairness for newcomers entering the new workforce, and through initiatives like foreign credentials recognition and the Fairness for Newcomers Act. Very apropos to this panel and topic. Please go ahead, Minister Copping.
Well, thanks again so much, Saul. And again, I'm honored to lead the discussion. For my remarks, I'd like to talk broadly about three things. Why creating a more inclusive and diverse workforce and society is so critical, particularly right now. Steps that we are taking as a government, in particular, my department, Department of Labor and Immigration, is already taking to accomplish this. What additional action that we're thinking of taking down the road? And then lastly, I'm going to close with an ask of all of you participating here today. So the first topic is, why is diversity and inclusivity so critical? And it's trite to say this, but I sort of fashion this under like the moral imperative. And I know my panel members will speak much more eloquently to this than I, but it's so critical because it's fair, it is right, and it is just. People should be judged on who they are and what they do and how they contribute, not on the color of their skin, their ethnic background, gender, or who they love. Families should be able to walk down the street without living in fear. You know, the tragedy that happened in London, my colleague, Parliamentary Secretary Mohammed Yassin, spoke about how that impacted him as a Muslim man who has a family, who goes for walks. And that act of terror impacts him and his family. And I was so touched by that. And my heart goes out to the family, but no one in our society should have to have that fear. And we are all responsible to address that. So the first reason why this is so critical to address, not only in our society, but also in our workplaces, is because diversity and inclusivity is morally right. The second reason I would talk about is the social imperative. You know, Canada and Alberta includes peoples of many different races, ethnic backgrounds, religions, cultures, different communities. You know, when we think about from our Indigenous peoples to European settlers, newcomers from around the world, whether it be Southeast Asia or Africa or anywhere else, although everyone in our province is an individual and should be seen as such, various communities have a variety of different traditions, cultures, ways of thinking about the world. And this adds to the richness of Alberta society. And quite frankly, we are better for it. And the third imperative is what I would call the economic imperative. And I like to lay out two perspectives. First is from a labor market perspective. Canada's population, like many first world nations, is aging. And without immigration, our population will shrink, and so too will our workforce and our economy, and the ability to support our social programs. And we are competing, Canada and Alberta, with the rest of the world for the best and the brightest to come here, not only to support our labor market, but also as a place where newcomers and Albertans can grow and thrive together. And to do this, our society and our workplaces must be open and inclusive. And then another economic perspective is the organizational perspective. And I think TD in the opening remarks, you hit on that as well. That studies have shown that diverse and inclusive companies create better returns for shareholders and are better places to work. By having people with diverse backgrounds who can have meaningful input, better decisions are made, and it creates opportunities for approaching different markets. And because they are better places to work, they're better attracting and retaining workers. And many of our Alberta companies are competing on a global scale. And stronger organizations mean better outcomes, economic growth, and more jobs. And quite frankly, this is a virtuous circle that we need to pursue. So what is government doing to make our society and workplaces more inclusive? We're taking a myriad of actions. And I can tell you this is a whole cross-government approach. My colleague, the Minister Madu, is undertaking an entire review of our justice system. My other colleague, Minister here, the Minister of Multiculturalism and the Status, Culture and the Status of Women, she's doing tremendous work with the Alberta Anti-Racism Advisory Council, which we all spoke to, the three ministers, earlier this week, and talking about the report and what we're doing and how we're going to advance anti-racism within Alberta. And I'd like to speak a little bit about what we're doing in my department of labor and immigration, and the focus is more on employment and on integration. So first, talking a little bit about training and employment, I recognize, and we all recognize that there are a number of groups experience higher degrees of unemployment. These include First Nations people. These include newcomers who are often hit the hardest when there's an economic downturn. And so our department has developed programs specifically targeted to these groups to help provide the skills that they need to either get into the workforce or to transfer from one sector that's not performing as well to another sector where there's higher demand. And these include the Training for Work program, includes the Aboriginal Training to Employment program, and the First Nations Training to Employment program. We devote approximately $26 million to support immigrant bridging, integrated training, self-employment, transition to employment services, and also workplace training. And in addition, and I just want to highlight one other example in this space, we recognize that if we help accelerate job creation generally, this will help all groups, including those who are the hardest hit by economic downturns. And over the last few weeks, I was pleased to announce the Alberta Jobs Now program. And this is investing up to $370 million to support more than 22,000 jobs being created in the province. It helps reduce the cost of hiring and training unemployed Albertans. It has very wide parameters. Small, medium-sized, and large-sized businesses can apply from any sector. And what it does is it grants 25% of salary for a 52-week period, up to $25,000 per employee. However, we recognize that we need to capture broader groups, and that for people with and Albertans with disabilities, there can be higher costs moving into the workplace. So this program also includes a grant which is 1.5 times higher than the standard grant, up to $37,500 per year. Again, creating a more inclusive workplace. And the intake is already open, the first intake, and there'll be second intakes next fall, and then a third intake next year. And then, as mentioned earlier, our Fairness for Newcomer plan. You know, our premier was one of the longest serving premiers in the immigration portfolio federally, and understands how newcomers can add not only richness to our society, but help drive our economy and create jobs, not only for themselves, but for other Canadians and, quite frankly, for other Albertans. And so we ran on a platform of putting in place a Fairness for Newcomers action plan. I was pleased to be the minister to pass the Fair Registration Practices Act, which establishes a Fairness for Newcomers office to speed up the registration process for skilled and qualified applicants, including newcomers. We established additional funding, for example, Windmill Microlending, which is a loan program to expand access to low interest loans to immigrant professionals who come here and then need to actually do some extra courses or write some exams to get certified, but may not have the monetary means to do that. So loans to be able to keep them going through the process, so they can do what they came here to do, and quite frankly, what we invited them here to do, given their phenomenal education. And we continue to support the work of immigrant settlement agencies, like from a number that you're going to hear from tonight, and to offer skills upgrading underemployed foreign professionals, and also in terms of assistance from a language training standpoint. So these are the things that we are focusing on now, but there's more to do. So looking forward, we will be launching 2 new streams, the Rural Entrepreneur Stream and the Rural Renewal Stream. And what's critically important about this is we recognize that in launching these streams, which actually target rural Alberta, that there needs to be local community participation. That not only is it asking people to come into rural Alberta, which may have less capacity for integration, funding organizations locally, with also the assistance of some of the great organizations we have in Calgary and in Edmonton, some of whom we'll be talking tonight, to give them the skills to be able to welcome individuals so that the newcomers can feel welcome. They feel, and they can integrate into the community and then get working as quickly as possible, not only to their benefit, but to the benefit of all Albertans. We will be holding a Premier Summit on our newcomers this summer. And the purpose of this summit is to highlight the value newcomers and diversity brings to the Alberta and to the economy. We're going to talk about successes and challenges regarding credential recognition and look at how further improve our Fairness for Newcomers action plan. We'll be creating a government mentorship for newcomers program in the coming months. And also we'll be going out consulting about how to improve our Alberta immigration nominee program, make it work better and integrate people, welcome people and integrate people faster in terms of getting their certification, but also looking for advice on what's working federally and not working federally, so we can be a strong advocate for newcomers here in Alberta with the federal government and also ourselves. And the last thing I want to comment on is my own personal focus. We have a tremendous amount of work to do to get Albertans back to work, and newcomers can provide a key component as not only providing opportunities for themselves, but opportunities for other Albertans. But to be successful in that, we need to ensure that not only our society, but our corporations are welcoming. And we have some phenomenal organizations within Alberta that do this very well. And I'm, again, very pleased with TD supporting this. But we have some who don't do it so well. And so it really, it's all about culture. So the next few years, I'm going to be spending my entire focus on working to change culture, to highlight those organizations that are doing it well and help those organizations that are not doing well not only understand the benefits, but understand how they can develop a more diverse and inclusive workforce. And if we can do that together, then we all win. So again, in closing, our government is continuing to look at ways to end racism and discrimination and to ensure people that are from around the world who come here and people who are already here are proud to call Alberta home and recognize it as a place which is inclusive, diverse, and fair. And so my ask of you in participating in this, and then as we walk away from this, is be part of the movement towards ending racism and discrimination and promoting diverse and inclusive workplaces in Alberta. Help define an inclusive culture within your own workplaces, because culture is defined as the people who work in it. And the culture is defined by what you walk away from. So raise your voice if you see something, raise it with your colleagues, raise it with your supervisors, because we all have a responsibility for culture. And then I ask employers, and this is not only for employers participating in this call, but I will be asking employers that you have an obligation and a responsibility to build a diverse and inclusive workforce, and that we need to work together to do that. So once again, thank you so much for having me here today. And now I'm really looking forward to listening to the real experts in this space, and they're coming up right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Copping. Well, you sure covered a lot of ground in that and a lot of programs. Albeit there was so much interest in the Alberta Jobs Now program, you'll continue to be very busy. But it sounds from what you went through that you're already very, very busy. I'm going to pass it now. We're also very honored to have Dr. Sally Zhao, CEO of the Immigrant Education Society and Alberta Association of Immigrant Serving Agencies Governance Committee member. Dr. Sally is the Chief Executive Officer of the Immigrant Education Society, known as TIES. I wore a tie in her honor. Prior to joining TIES, Sally worked at various post-secondary institutions as an educator and researcher, including Cardiff University in the UK and the University of Calgary, right here in Calgary. Sally is passionate about volunteering and community work. She is also a believer in diversity and inclusion. She is very grateful to work alongside a very diverse leadership team, to serve a multicultural clientele at TIES. Sally used to be at Alberta Teachers of English as a Second Language, used to be on the board, and the Alberta Association of Immigrant Serving Agencies board as well, and was on the AISA Governance Committee and Bow Valley College Research Ethics Board. She's very happy to contribute to the Alberta Mental Health and Addictions Council as a council member, and we're now very pleased to pass the floor to Dr. Zhao. Go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Zhao, and as so introduced, I'm the CEO of the Immigrant Education Society, for short, TIES. I have prepared a presentation talking about racism and discrimination in general. I believe my colleagues Anila and Umar is going to go deeper and giving more specific details and examples. And I'm going to share my screen with you. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, Sally, you're good.
Great, thank you so much. I want to start my presentation. Let me see, seems, okay. I want to start my presentation by saying racism is real. As a visible Chinese Canadian woman, at the early days of my career in Canada, I was approached by a colleague with a question, how did you get your job? In the tone with a facial expression implying you didn't get it based on your merits. Without knowing me at all, basically just by my appearance, a visible Chinese Canadian. I have a sector friend who is Black woman. She publicly shared her experience when she was approached with a question where she is from, and she answered, I'm from Edmonton. The person rolled up his eyes and repeat the question in a quite aggressive way. I mean, where are you really from? My friend answered, I'm really from Edmonton. So we all can see racism and discrimination is real and it's very wrong. So today I'm going to share with you how we can stand together as allies to fight against racism and discrimination. I'm going to share 4 points with you. Among many, 6 things we all can do. I also want to invite all of you to do a self-reflection on 6 questions. And then I'm going to talk about racism and discrimination in workplace. Lastly, I'm going to share with you a very useful source I found from website, 3 zones of becoming an anti-racist. So first of all, 6 things we all can do. Speak up. No matter you are a victim or a witness, silence is deadly. Apathy can be interpreted as acceptance by the perpetrators, the public, and the victims. If left unchallenged, the behavior of racism and discrimination persist, grow, and escalate. Slurs can escalate to harassment, harassment to threats, and threats to physical violence. Secondly, support the victims. Victims of racism and discrimination often feel terribly alone and afraid. They have been attacked simply for being who they are, their race, their religion, their sexual orientation. Silence can amplify their isolation. So we all need to provide the support. Victims needed to know they are valued and we care about them. Number 3, elected officials and other community leaders can be important allies. When elected officials issue proclamations against racism and discrimination, it helps promote tolerance and can unify communities. The support of elected officials and community leaders can help the community address the root causes of racism and discrimination and help turn bias incidents into experiences from which the community can learn and heal. When leaders step forward and act swiftly in the wake of a hate incident, victims feel supported, community members feel safe, and space for action and dialogue can grow. Number 4, educate the public about respect, acceptance, and tolerance, promote diversity and inclusion. Among many multicultural festivals and events is one of the most important channels to bring communities together, celebrating inclusion, diversity, and promoting respect, tolerance, and acceptance. Number 5, teach children about acceptance and tolerance at school and at home. By age 3, children can be aware of racial differences. By age 12, they can hold stereotypes about race, religion, or LGBTQ people. Because stereotypes underlie racism, discrimination, and hate, and because almost all of the hate crimes are committed by young people and almost half of the hate crimes are committed by young people under age 20. Tolerance education is critical. Schools are an ideal environment to counter bias because they mix children of different backgrounds, place them on equal footing, and allow one-on-one interaction. Children also are naturally curious about people who are different. Parents can expose their children to multicultural environments by intentionally expanding their circle of friends and experiences. Model inclusive language and behavior. Children learn from the language parents use and the attitudes and behavior parents model. If parents demonstrate a deep respect for other cultures, races, and walks of life, children most likely will too. Number 6, self-reflection. We're all human beings. We grow up with prejudices, consciously or subconsciously. Acknowledging them and working through them can be a scary and difficult process. Meanwhile, it is also one of the most important steps toward breaking down the walls of silence and allow intolerance to grow. Luckily, we all possess the power to overcome our ignorance and fear, to influence our children, peers, and the community. Acceptance fundamentally is a personal choice. It comes from an attitude and is learnable and embraceable, a belief that every voice matters, that all people are valued, that no one is less than. I want to invite all of you to ask yourself the following 6 questions for self-reflection on the language we use and the assumptions we make about others. Number 1, am I quick to label people? Number 2, do I look with disdain at families on welfare? Or do I try to understand the socioeconomic forces that prevent many families from climbing out of poverty? Number 3, how wide and diverse is my circle of friends? Number 4, do I have the courage to ask a friend not to tell a racist or homophobic joke? Number 5, do I receive information about other cultures from members of those cultures or from potentially biased and third-party sources? The last one, do I take the time to listen and learn from other people's experiences, especially people who are different from me? About the discrimination and racism at workplace, of course, it is real. Again, my colleagues will give some more examples, but there are, a lot of examples like microaggressions, workplace harassment. Of course, the impacts are very negative. Some examples are here. It damages people's physical and mental health. It decreases productivity and hurts the organization financially. It undermines organization culture with poor relationships among co-workers. It ruins the organization's reputation with clients. What to do to fight against racism and discrimination at workplace? First of all, we need to admit the existence of racism and discrimination. Create a safe environment to talk about racism and discrimination. Ensure a policy of inclusion and diversity in place, as the minister stated earlier, and observed and practiced in daily operations. Of course, hold racists accountable. Now I'm going to share with you a very useful source I found from website. To become an anti-racist, we need to step out of fear zone. From denying racism is a problem, avoiding hard questions, strive to be comfortable, only talk to people who are similar or same with me. To learning though, recognizing the problem, seeking out questions that make me uncomfortable, understand my own privilege, ignoring racism, educate myself about race and structural racism, vulnerable about my own bias and knowledge gaps, listen to others who are different from me, and then step into growth though, identify how may unknowingly benefit from racism, promote and advocate for policies and leaders that are anti-racist, sit with my discomfort, speak out when I see racism in action, educate my peers how racism harms our profession. It harms everyone. I don't let mistakes deter me from being better, yield positions of power to those otherwise marginalized, surround myself with others who think and look different from me. Lastly, I want to say, every one of us, we are all in it together. Everyone plays a role. We need to stand together in solidarity to fight against racism and discrimination for systemic change, and also for an inclusive, pluralistic, and harmonious society, because we find strengths in unity. Thank you.
Wow, thanks, Dr. Sally. There's so much to reflect on there, and I'll ponder the 6 things that we can all do and those 6 questions. It's difficult. You talked about the story of your colleague who had to stay there from Edmonton. I think those of us who are visible all have those painful experiences. Just 2 weeks ago, I had to tell someone that to go home, would have to go back to Sudbury, Ontario, where I was born and raised, despite their questions about where I should go home to. Once again, so much to consider. Thanks, Dr. Sally. I'm now pleased to introduce Anila Umar Lee Yuen, President and CEO of the Center for Newcomers and a top 25 woman of influence in Canada. She has 25 plus years of experience in the settlement sector. Since joining the CFN in 2016 with the support of a staff and team of 160, Anila has grown the agency by 5 million, adding nationally recognized programming such as LGBTQ+, refugee supports, and Indigenous education for newcomers. Anila continues to strongly advocate for vulnerable persons, especially women and children. She is the recipient of the Governor General's Award in commemoration of the Person's Case in 2001 for her work advocating for the rights of immigrant and minority women and children in Canada. Other accolades include a University of Calgary Alumni Award, Top 40 Under 40 designation, Women of Inspiration, and Top 25 Women of Influence in Canada. Anila, we very much look forward to your presentation.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate being here today. I'm really going to hopefully spend a little bit more time to complement what Minister Copping has been speaking about and what Sally spoke about as well. And then Anne-Marie will round us all up after I'm done. I really wanted to talk more in my talk about the lived experience and how a lot of what we're talking about today really manifests in terms of people's lives, right? And I know many of you would have experienced this yourselves, and for some of these things are going to be new, right? And so how do we address those issues, and how do we actually look for them and see them, right? Because sometimes, even as racialized community members like myself, I haven't always, I also have unconscious bias, right? We live in a society that is very much focused on a dominant culture and a dominant way of thinking, and that's become normative, right? Similarly, that the heteronormative way of thinking, so male and females falling in love, is a very specific way that we have normalized society. Similarly, in Canada, we've normalized a dominant settler culture to be the normal or the the predominant way of looking at things. And even as racialized communities, we can unconsciously look at that as the way to be. So there's often things that even I don't really realize until it's pointed out to me that I might be doing, right? And so I'd really like to talk about the lived experience And as part of the lived experience, really talking about 3 things. So one, barriers to employment, and we heard a few of them already from Minister Copping and from Dr. Zhao. And then I'd like to talk about microaggressions and what that really means in terms of things that might come across as positive, and then also things that are more blatant. And then lastly, I'd really like to, round it off by speaking to some really blatant and specific cases of discrimination and harassment in the workplace that I have actually witnessed and that I have actually been a part of as a way of really talking in terms of case studies that are that people can think about, that we can think about in terms of, have we experienced these things, have we not, how would we address them, and using Sally's 6 questions could really be a part of that as well as we try to deconstruct some of these things. So going back to, the barriers to employment, right? One of the things that we know statistically, it's proven through all kinds of different research, that if your name is Jacob, you are going to get more callbacks from your resume than if your name is Yakub. It's the same name. One is just said in a Western context and the other one is said in an Eastern context, but it is exactly the same biblical name, Jacob or Yakub. And it was, that came from, I was actually reading a testimonial today of a woman who said that that was her father's lived experience, that he couldn't get a job as highly educated as he was in Canada when he put his name down as Yakub. But when he started changing it to Jacob, all of a sudden he got lots of callbacks. And that is definitely, something that is very true in terms of the barriers to employment before you even get your foot in the door, in terms of racism and discrimination. Other things that I've seen, I have a good friend of mine. Her name is Lynn. You would think that Lynn is not a problem, right? Lynn, it's a very common name, except it's spelled L-I-N-H, it's Vietnamese. And she was told repeatedly, if you just spell it L-Y-N-N or change your name to Linda, L-I-N-D-A, you are not going to have as many issues in terms of integrating and getting a job. So she did. And it was easier for her to get callbacks for resumes, right? And it's the same name. It's pronounced the exact same way, Lynn, L-I-N-H or L-Y-N-N, right? So these are things, of course, just in terms of who we are before people even see what our face looks like as a barrier to employment. Minister Copping has done an amazing job in terms of foreign credentials and fair access and fair, fair registration of our credentials for people that are foreign credentials, but that's still something that we do have to combat every day, is that people not recognizing foreign credentials. And of course, lastly, is the Canadian experience, chicken or the egg, right? You can't get the Canadian experience if you don't actually get a job in Canada, but you can't get a job in Canada without Canadian experience, which is really counterintuitive to what we know logically, right? People that are speaking multiple languages, people that have networks from around the world, that have done business around the world, are going to help our Canadian economy, our economy in Calgary and in Alberta, much more than people that don't have those networks and those abilities to be able to do that, and that critical thinking that can be translated into different situations and different places. So we know that it's actually better to have multiple experiences. Also, why we try to get our children to go on, studies, across the world for exchanges and things like that, because we want people to broaden their horizons. But when it comes to it, that's not actually how we live. And so, of course, those are the barriers to employment that we often see, right? And the counter to that, of course, is working with all of these different settlement agencies and all these different groups that actually work with employers to be able to find a diverse workforce. And more, I'm getting a lot of really fancy headhunters and recruiting firms saying, hey, do you know somebody that we could connect with that has all of these credentials? Because more and more boards at corporate levels are requiring diversity, and our community is requiring diversity. And that diversity is starting off with gender balance, right? So having at least, 50% women, which hasn't been something done previously, and we still don't see that, but also diversity in other ways as well. And so we're making those changes to that, but it's very, very slow, right? When we start talking about microaggressions, and some things might come across as positive, right? Every time, how many of us come from Asian countries and somebody makes the comment, oh, you're good at math. Newsflash, I'm terrible at math. I'm not actually sure how I got an MBA by a lot of hard work. I'm terrible at math. But people will see my credential of an MBA and they'll say, well, obviously, because you're Asian. And that's a microaggression right in there. It's saying that I am something, and and it's racist to say that I'm good at math because I am from, my family is originally from Asia, right? And so things like that we'll hear often. Or affirmative action tropes, right? Oh, you got the job because they're looking for a woman who's a person of color. Okay, I get it. No, I believe in diversity. I believe in equity. This is good. Too bad for the other guy that couldn't get the job, right? And it's like, where is my merit? And what Sally was speaking to in terms of all of the hard work that I put into that. I got the job because I was the best to get the job in that situation. I might not be the best in the world. Obviously, there's always somebody better than you, but they didn't apply for the job, And so that's why I got that. Or, of course, it comes across as more blatant, right? I've been in work roles where, I'm sitting there, new job, and somebody comes in and is like, wow, I'm a little bit late for this meeting because I had to make my way through Canyon Ghetto. They were making a reference to Canyon Meadows, the community of Canyon Meadows. And and a bunch of us looked at them like, what? And they're like, because of all of the Latinos. And we're like, that doesn't make it better. What are you saying? But these are things that I deal with every day in different situations my entire life. This just happened a couple of years ago. I was like, that is not appropriate, but people think that it's okay to make a joke like that. I was once, true story, I was once, we didn't have enough space in a place that I worked, and I had a director title at this point. So I'm like in a senior management role. We didn't have enough place, and I'm sorting papers. So I was sorting them on the ground, and a woman walked by and said to me, hey, Anila, is that the way to Mecca? And I went, what? She said, because you're Muslim, Mecca, you're on your knees. And I just thought, and these are things that are happening in regular workplaces that are supposed to be professional, and these are places that are, the one incident was in a higher education learning institute. And the second one was in a major not-for-profit that works with children, in our school system. And these were the situations that were happening in organizations that were supposed to be very prideful of diversity. So, these are what I consider microaggressions that people need to deal with on an everyday basis. And then when it comes to actual discrimination and harassment in much more blatant terms, right, where you're called names, where you're being harassed for who you are, we all know those incidents. We can all talk about those incidents. I wanted to spend the last 2 minutes of my conversation really talking about what it is that we don't hear. Going back to what I said right at the beginning around, sometimes we don't hear things because we don't understand what somebody else is trying to say to us. And now that I'm in an employer role as a CEO, we find ourselves in situations, especially working with, most of my staff are newcomers, whether they've come a couple of years ago or whether they've been here for 20 or 30 years. And we are working with people from all kinds of diverse backgrounds. and how people communicate about uncomfortable circumstances can be very different than what is normative in Canadian context, where I grew up and how I've learned to speak up and speak out for my rights when something is happening. So, you know, we had an incident once where there was harassment going on in the workplace and somebody witnessed it. But instead of saying that this person is harassing this person and, and I'm making a complaint to HR, they went to HR and they said, it's really strange. So and so goes into this other person's office like 15 or 20 times a day. I'm counting. It's weird, right? And the HR person just went, okay, but why are you counting? And what does that have to do with anything? They said, well, it's strange. And they just kept saying, it's strange. I'm counting. And it was almost 6 months later that we realized that what that person was trying to tell us, but didn't know how to say, was that that person's going in there because they are harassing the other employee. And the employee that was trying to bring it to our attention, she culturally didn't have the words and didn't know, and that was an appropriate way for her to bring that forward, right? And so we've had to spend a lot of time at the Center for Newcomers really talking about how do we communicate and really taking onus on ourselves instead of chalking that up to, oh, that was a weird comment that they were making. Like, okay, why does it matter? Somebody went into somebody's office 15 times in the day, like who cares, kind of thing, to really stop and start asking, what could this actually mean? And having conversations in a safe space to let people really speak in the way that they feel comfortable, as opposed to having people need to conform to the ways that we think and the ways that we say things. And so, that's what I wanted to really leave you with, is that when we're dealing with discrimination, racism, or any form of harassment or discrimination in a workplace, and especially with a diverse workforce, people might actually be trying to tell you something. And because we have very specific normative ways of looking at things, we may not actually realize what people are trying to say. So, the onus, of course, is on the employees, but it's also on us as the community, whether we're witnesses and, bystanders, or whether we're the actual employers, to be able to say, this is a safe space, and to inquire more and probe more in terms of not dropping it, not just chalking it up to, that is just really weird, which is what we did. And it was a big mistake in terms of what we did. And it's still something that keeps me up at night. So I wanted to share that with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anila. That was a very powerful conversation. But I have to admit, Yoda was slightly distracting behind you. It's very important to recognize that racialized communities also contain biases, and to look past. I loved how you closed to what has been said, to what does it mean, and try to look into that meaning. Thank you. It's now with pleasure and grace that I introduce you to Ms. Anne-Marie Pham, Executive Director of the Canadian Centre for Diversity and Inclusion, known as CCDI, and a member of the City of Calgary Anti-Racism Action Committee. Anne-Marie was previously the Manager of Diversity and Employment Equity at Spectra Energy and led the City of Calgary's Corporate Framework and Action Plan for Diversity and Inclusion in the Workplace. She also trained and provided advice to employers under the Racism-Free Workplace Strategy of Human Resources and Skills Development Canada. Anne-Marie developed multiple partnerships between public, nonprofit, and corporate sectors to advance diversity and inclusion in the workplace. She's the co-founder and active member of the Calgary Vietnamese Youth Association, the Asian Professional Network of Calgary, and the Calgary Diversity and Inclusion Network. Anne-Marie is also on the board of the Canadian Race Relations Foundation and a member of the City of Calgary's Anti-Racism Action Committee. She received the Queen's Diamond Jubilee Award in 2013 and the Alberta Centennial Medal in 2005 for her dedication to community service. Anne-Marie, I pass the mic to you for our last, but I'm sure certainly not least presentation. Go ahead, Anne-Marie.
Thank you so very much. I'm very excited to be with all of you tonight. Actually, I loved all of the presentations I've heard so far, you know, coming from government, coming from the community, just the breadth and the depth of experiences and the authenticity in your stories as well. Really appreciate it. While I am very grounded and I love community work, I'm going to put on the workplace lens for this presentation. At CCDI, we now work with over 530 employer partners across Canada, and we walk alongside them on their journey to be more diverse and inclusive. And as we're planning today's presentation between Sally, Anila, and myself, I thought it would be appropriate to wrap up today's presentations with one on your role in allyship. So if that's okay with you, I will share my screen and hopefully you can see it. What I want to do is just really take a moment to talk about the role that each and every one of us can play to address racism and discrimination in the workplace. So welcome, bienvenue, King Zhao to all of you. And these are the most, by the way, common languages in Canada. So what does it mean to be an ally? Let's start with that. First of all, I want to say that to be an ally is really looking at it a couple of ways. One way is looking at it from the perspective of being reactive, right? So we can be reactive when we are looking at the situation, we're dealing with the situation, and we're trying to figure out what is it that I'm doing in the moment. So it's going to take thinking, it's going to take planning and courage to act in the moment. It's also about being proactive and realizing that, you know, we have a role to play to educate ourselves, to learn more, and to act in allyship when the time comes. So it's both proactive and reactive. So I'll start off with that. And to be an ally, you know, is typically, as it's defined, it's not being a member of an underrepresented group, but taking action to support that group. And it's rooted in the term alliance, which is the relationship amongst people, groups, or states that have come together for mutual benefit or to achieve some common purpose. So in the work of equity, diversity, inclusion, accessibility, the common purpose here is really the equitable inclusion of all people in our society, right? In the workplace, in our schools, in our communities. And an ally, therefore, first and foremost, supports equality and respect for all. I love that the Center for Newcomers has done initiatives around the LGBTQ+ community, because that's an example of allyship, right? Going outside of what you typically do and really identifying other groups that we can support. And it's about accepting someone for who they are and their various dimensions of diversity. And here are some examples: gender identity, culture, religion, sexual orientation, ethnicity, various abilities and disabilities, lived experiences, age, etc. And this last point is really important because it recognizes that we're all diverse in relation to one another. It requires a mindset of acceptance, of diversity, of curiosity to learn about each other. And it really speaks to the need, I think, for us just to stop being the center of the world and of everything, that Eurocentric lens, and for us to actually move towards ethno-relativism, that not everything revolves around us, but for us instead to be one of many and in relation with other people on a more equal and respectful footing. It's not easy to do, but I think every one of us can do that to reduce this polarization that we're seeing in society and this us versus them mentality. And it really sets the stage for, or the foundation for allyship. And to be an ally is really to utilize one's credibility to create a more inclusive workplace where everyone can thrive, right? And you've got to find ways to make your privilege work for others. And we all have different degrees of privilege, right? Some of us don't experience marginalization the same way that other folks might. We can observe this in the workplace. Think about your position, how long you've been in the organization, the kind of connections and network that you have, the knowledge, the visibility that you may have in your organization, right? And then think about your dimensions of diversity. What are your life circumstances? And what are some of the privilege or the challenges that you have along the way? So doing allyship is really supporting others, using the privilege, the connections, and your voice to bring visibility and tangible changes to the issues that actually might impact folks who do experience racism and discrimination at work because of just who they are, right? And so in this picture of Will Smith, you know, he actually talks about the difference between fault and responsibility. Having an identity that is privileged in a society is not anyone's fault. It's not your fault that you were born in a particular body or circumstance. It just is. But now that you have that particular stripe of privilege, it's your responsibility to actually use it to create change for folks who might not share that particular privilege, right? And so it's not, you know, it's not to feel guilty about it, but it's about what can we do with that to become, to try to strive for being an ally. So here are some strategies to consider to act in allyship. So I talked about this already. You know, allyship can be both reactive or proactive, right? Reactive in the moment, and I think Sally and Anila talked about this. We can, instead of just being a bystander and witnessing it, we can do something about it. We can observe, and then with courage, reflection, and practice, we can respond in the moment. But also being proactive, right? Actions that you can take on without the catalyst of someone else's actions and or experiences, and recognizing that you have work to do, both within yourself and with our communities. And allyship can look like a bunch of different things, right? It's about running campaigns like National Accessibility Week. It's about learning like the Indigenous Ally Toolkit or Guide to Being an Ally to Transgender and Non-Binary Youth. It's about marching and supporting movements like Asians for Black Lives, or the man and the father and his son marching for women's rights, right? So it can look like many different things. And I want to share with you some personal strategies and then some organization strategies to think about to move towards allyship. So first of all, reflect on your own experiences. Sally talked about, you know, who is in your circle of friends, right? Who are you connected with? Do you understand? Are there particular groups that you would like to ally with? Okay, so do that reflection piece based on your circumstances, where you're at, and the things that you can change. The second one is really vital. Check your biases, right? Conscious and unconscious. We all have them. In a way, that's sort of how our brain functions to be as efficient as possible, is to jump into conclusions, to go into those unconscious patterns of understanding that unfortunately sometimes are inaccurate and untrue. And yet those patterns have been formed in our brains, and we retrieve them sometimes unconsciously without thinking. We need to unlearn those things, right? We need to deconstruct those biases that are often based on myths or stereotypes. Be willing to listen and learn. This is really important. Listen to learn as opposed to listening to prepare your answer or to defending your point. Open our mind and heart to really learn, engage in meaningful dialogue, and to try to avoid debating a point just to get a point across. When we're seeking allyship, we're here first and foremost to listen and to learn. Another one that's really important, I think, is just to do your own research, right? It's really important to understand the myriad of issues faced by other people by actually having done some of the legwork yourself, rather than expecting the emotional labor and burden on people who experience already marginalization to always be the ones to educate you, right? So let's do our own work and come as prepared as possible. You know, there's Pride Month, the Indigenous Awareness Month, just this month, in the month of June. There's Filipino Heritage Month in June as well. Lots of events happening out there for us to take part on and to learn more about. Sometimes when we are an ally, it's really easy to want to rescue people who experience marginalization. We may think that we're doing the right thing to jump in and save them from a bad situation, kind of like a parent who would jump in and save a child, you know, from danger. But we have to be thoughtful about when we do that. Oftentimes, people who experience racism or discrimination don't need someone to save them as much as they need support and validation of their experiences and an amplification of their voices and their stories, right? Allyship is about using your privilege to create that space so that other people who might not have access to that space now do. And finally, it's recognizing that people who belong to a marginalized community are not a monolith. You know, that there is a lot of variety within different races or ethnicities. We're not all crazy rich Asians. You know, there are many of us all across the socioeconomic spectrum. And if you look at the history of immigration, you can see the unique lived experience of various communities, the Black communities, right? The Chinese communities, the Japanese communities, who have very unique experiences. And so those are some personal strategies to think about. And here are some organizational strategies. So we do lots of work with workplaces, and oftentimes they say to us, where do we start? Like, there's so much work that we need to do, and we need some guidance. Here are some 6 key buckets that I think on the whole can provide you with a fairly comprehensive approach. So first of all, you need to know where you're at in order to plan, right, on what to do. So assess the workplace climate, right? What's the ecosystem like? Are people happy in your workplace, right? Are they blossoming? Are they growing? Or are they, you know, scared? Are they timid? Are they closed in? Measure the diversity of your workforce throughout all the levels, right? So do you have representation at all levels of your organization? If you don't, why not, right? Find out a little bit more and actually take the time to consult with affected employees, clients, and partners. Oftentimes we make decisions at the top without really listening to the experiences, the barriers, and the proposed solutions from people who are directly impacted by some of the decisions that you may make. And then build strategic directions. You know, at a high level, what are the key strategic priorities of my organization? And actually, how do I tie that to diversity and inclusion, right? So Minister Copper talked about some of the you know, stats about the business case for diversity and inclusion. If you need to go there, right? Some organizations, unfortunately, are not quite there on the social or moral imperative. So we have to start with the business case, and then we move them along the needle. So find out kind of what are the key reasons that your workplace needs to understand and get the leadership buy-in from. And then create a plan with appropriate resources and an accountability framework so everybody knows their role. Then for sure provide education, convene dialogue, and share resources. And finally, we got to make sure that we are monitoring our progress and that we're reporting back, and that feeds into accountability. And I have just 2 more slides. There are different types of allies in an organization. And for example, you can be an advocate, right? You can advocate for individuals who maybe have been missed at events, at planning meetings, or for career building opportunities. You can act as an amplifier. You can, for example, when somebody is saying something and it's a great idea, you can repeat it and actually give them credit for what they have suggested. You can act as a champion or an ambassador of diversity and inclusion to be there for people when they have events, to support them, to speak about the cause, to rally the troop. You can act as a confidant, to believe in others' experiences. Don't assume something couldn't happen just because you actually haven't personally experienced it. To listen and ask questions when someone describes an experience that you haven't had, and not jump in automatically with your own personal stories. You can be a scholar, right? Do your own work, investigate, read publications, join events, ask coworkers if they're willing to about their experiences working at your organization. How to act as a sponsor when they're not in the room and you know how good these people are. They may just not have the connection, right? Or that role that has the visibility. So mention their name when they're not in the room. Act as a sponsor for them so that they get those stretch assignment or that promotion. As an upstander, this one is really important. Speak up when you can. When you witness a behavior or a speech that is degrading or offensive. Take a stance and be there for other people. And finally, I want to just wrap up with this really cool graphic by a Black artist named Daniel Koch. And I just think it's a perfect way to wrap up the conversation because each and every one of us already has all the tools that we need to be an ally. We've got a heart to cultivate empathy for the oppressed, ears to listen to the experiences of people of color, eyes to identify privilege, a nose to sniff out implicit bias, a mouth to speak out against injustice, and hands to take action and make a change. And that wraps up my presentation. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. As you said, establishing allies is extremely important. And I learned a new term, ethno-relativism. I'll keep that. Great strategies, and I really look forward to having your deck, if I could, and from Dr. Zhao. Our Q&A will commence soon, and the chat should be enabled. But first, thank you again to all of our panelists, Minister Copping, Dr. Zhao, Anila, Umar, Lee, Yuen, Anne-Marie Pham, and our legacy sponsor, TD Bank and Mr. Frank Sang. And thank you to the almost 90 participants for tonight's panel. Frank and I will now lead the panelists through as many Q&A questions as time permits, and I recognize we only have about a little over 10 minutes left in this panel. Frank, I'm going to pass it to you as you have a question already for Minister Copping.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sal. Good job here. Again, thanks everybody, especially Minister Jason Copping and attending tonight's meeting. Like you said, TD is very proud to sponsor this events. We always stand united with all Asian communities, and we working to combat any anti-Asian racism. We just recognize diversity represent one of our greatest strengths here in TD. So that's why we always been a strong supporter of all our Asian customers, colleagues, and communities for so many years. So I do have a first question here for Minister Copping. So how does the AINP program, Alberta Immigration Nomination Program, work so far this year during the pandemic? Can you please provide us some more details about the foreign and graduate stop visa stream and international graduate entrepreneur program? How does that work in 2020-21?
Well, thanks so much for the question, and thanks for sharing TD's experience. Again, it's incredibly important that we be able to showcase organizations on their journey in terms of making a diverse and inclusive workplace for those, quite frankly, who don't necessarily see the light or even don't have the tools to be able to do that. So I want to thank you for that. In regards to our Alberta Advantage immigration strategy, We were prepared to launch that just prior to COVID. COVID hit, so we delayed. We did do what I would call a soft launch of both the 2 streams, and those are the entrepreneur streams related to newcomers graduating from our fantastic post-secondary institutions here in Alberta, and also those from overseas. We haven't done any marketing of that, so we are going to relaunch them again when we launch our strategy, and that's going to be around the Premier Summit for newcomers, which will be held towards the end of July. And then in addition, we will launch the Rural Renewal and the Rural Entrepreneur streams as well. And then looking for feedback, because I want to thank, and many of you actually participated in consultations we did over a year ago, and looking at how to develop these streams, what will make them effective. Let's get them launched. But the commitment we made at that point in time is that we're going to launch these streams, but we're going to come back and consult again after we get them launched to see how they're working, because I'd rather us get something in quickly, see how it works, and if it's not working well, let's change it like a fast fail. And so we can make it work. But we're looking at a bunch of other things as well in terms of newcomers driving economic growth. So it's not only the entrepreneur streams, but things we're assessing right now is we understand that in the tech industry, for example, we not only do we put in training programs to train individuals who are laid off in certain sectors, and there's a huge demand in the tech sector, but what we also heard from the tech sector is that there is a senior people, they can't find enough senior people to train the junior people. So how do we actually help them through newcomers? And again, all of that's only successful if newcomers feel included. They feel like they're working in a workplace that's respect them and their opinions, and the focus is on ability. The focus is not on the color of skin, it's on competency. And so that's why it's really important that we do this, and we do this well.
Thank you for the question, Frank. Thank you, Minister Copping. We have a question for Dr. Zhao from David. What kind of job training opportunities are available for newcomers now at TIES?
There are quite a few employment-related programs, and a few funded by Minister Copping's office. And for example, I just give you some examples. I do notice our employment program director manager here as well. They may add anything, feel free to jump in. For example, we have ROWAs called ROWA, Return to Work in Alberta, funded by Minister Copping's ministry. So we also have iCode, Immigrant Coding Online for Development in Employment. And we have ASTA, Administrative Support for Digital Alberta. All these 3 employment programs are funded by Alberta Labor and Immigration, Mr. Copping's office. And we have other employment programs funded by federal government. We have I program, Empowering Youth Through Employment, also EYP, Enhancing Youth Possibilities. And we have different levels of computer training programs and different levels of accounting programs. We also have job-specific training program, childcare, warehouse logistics, and security training. Plus, we have entrepreneurship development program, just quite a few employment programs. So I noticed Suma and Mason on the line. Feel free to jump in if I missed any. This is just on top of my mind. And also, and if you need more detailed information, feel free to go to our website, www.immigrant-education.ca. And yeah, as I said, quite a few employment training programs available for newcomers and also financially challenged low-income Albertans or Calgarians. Hope I answered your question, David.
Thank you, Dr. Zhao. Our next question is for Anne-Marie. Anne-Marie, as the Executive Director of CCDI, do you have any examples of success on cultivating diversity, equity, and inclusion at the workplace?
Yes, we do. We have a lot of organizations that are on their way to success. I don't know that we have any organization that is super successful at the sort of the highest level, you know, in terms of diversity and inclusion. Because the bottom line is it's a long-term commitment, right? Think about the workplace as an ecosystem. You know, things have to work together for the ecosystem to flourish. And so when we're talking about success in the workplace, it's really about workplaces that are taking the time to really think about all of the elements that they need to have in place, not just for today or a month or a year, but for the long term. Diversity and inclusion needs to not just be that one program, but it needs to be built into the DNA or the operational system of your organization, and has to have a direct ties and linkages to your organizational strategic directions, mission, and mandate. If it's disconnected, the first thing that will get dropped off when you run out of money, when you have to cut costs, is oftentimes programs like diversity and inclusion programs. And so first and foremost, you gotta make sure that it's embedded into everything that you do. And you have to think of diversity and inclusion as that ecosystem, like a flower analogy. When the flower doesn't bloom, we don't fix the flower, we fix the soil, we water the flower, and we give it sunshine. So in the workplace, we have to think about the role that we have to create a healthy ecosystem where all of our employees thrive, regardless of their background and their circumstances. And so critically analyze the ecosystem and do some of the strategies that I mentioned earlier, assessing the environment, consulting with employees, creating a plan with accountabilities, educating the workplace, providing capacity and resources, monitor progress, and reporting back. And when you've got all of those pieces together, then you can truly call yourself a diverse and inclusive workplace. And so it takes time, it takes effort, but it's really important.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. We have a couple of questions for Anila. Anila, first from Michael. What about the program of CFN community-based care at the Center for Newcomers?
Oh, okay, yeah. I think that this is a program. It's our childcare program, and I think that the program for the community-based care is so important because it eliminates barriers for employment and for English language training. And it allows children to be placed in the community. And one of the things that the center does, our team does, is ensures that all of the daycares that are recommended have diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies already built in the daycare, so that they have had the training, that they know how to work with children from diverse backgrounds, and that they're creating a safe and inclusive environment for education within there as well. So I think a program like that really speaks to how everything that we do in our lives really needs to incorporate that educational piece, and also strive to meet all of the elements that Anne-Marie was talking about in terms of a safe, diverse and equitable space.
Thank you, Anila. There's actually an important question in the chat, and I'll put it to Dr. Zhao because I think it speaks to your presentation, although I could put it to anyone on this panel. But Dr. Zhao, the question from Abamadel is, I'd like the presenters to talk about the price of speaking up. How do immigrants in the workplace deal with the possible backlash that arises from speaking up at their places of employment about their experiences with racism and discrimination? Of course, anyone could jump in, but Dr. Zhao, I'd like to request your answer to that question first.
Yeah, first, it's a very good question. Thank you so much for the question. So first of all, at workplace, I think we should have a diversity and inclusion policy in place so that in a positive way, we are fighting against racism and discrimination together. And also we have to make sure the policy is practiced, observed on a daily basis, and have a safe environment. We can all talk about, our experience of racism or discrimination, and talking about racism, discrimination doesn't make you a racist. So we should understand that part. So, and with a safe environment, everybody's equally talking about that, or the experience, and provide the support. So I think that's my answer. I hope I answered your question.
It certainly did. Anila, Minister Copping, Anne-Marie, would you like to add on to that answer from Dr. Zhao?
I think I can see Minister Copping going to unmute himself. Go for it, Minister.
And I'd love to hear the answers from the other panel members. Being a former HR practitioner, it's if concerns and reach out to, because that's quite frankly what HR practitioners often are there for, be able to keep things to the extent that if it's not a complaint, but even just a concern or someone that's seeing something, be able to keep things confidential and talk about it. And the other thing is, and I'm going to Anna Marie, borrow from your presentation and talking to allies, right? Talking to your fellow coworkers, and I have to admit, being a middle-aged white guy, right? And my lived experience is very different from yours, and we all have different lived experiences. But the amount of discrimination that I've had to deal is probably significantly less than others. But having allies, people that you can talk to that are identified as allies and speaking out, speak to them or speak to HR. But I'd really like to hear, others who have dealt with this themselves in the workplace and how they dealt with it. But the big thing is, and what I think I'm seeing more of, which is really important, is that we all speak up. And so that you don't feel alone speaking up, that others are speaking up or speaking up for you when incidents like this happen.
Thanks, Minister Copping. Anila or Anne Marie, anything to add on?
Yeah, unfortunately, I've been in situations like this previously, and I've had friends and colleagues in these situations as well. And the most important thing, especially when there's, instances of gaslighting occurring. So so gaslighting is like when you say something and somebody twists it into something else and makes it sound like you said something else when you didn't say that and you didn't mean to say that or whatever else, right? And people do that a lot, right? When they're trying to win an argument. And I think what I've learned to do, unfortunately, and I really wish that I didn't have to, because it puts me in a position where it's very exhausting. Every time I've needed to do this, I've been very emotionally and even physically exhausted, but you have to document everything. You have to write down everything. You have to keep all of your pieces of paper. You have to keep all of the evidence that you can. And you do, as Minister Copping said, have to tell people. You have to tell your family that this is happening so that they can document it. In one instant, I had to go to my family doctor, and my family doctor had to, well, he didn't have to, but he chose to record it all, right? Because of the toll that it was having on me and the stress that I was going through, that he wanted to be able to, if, anything went to court or whatever, he wanted to have good notes so that he could actually say, no, this is real. She's not making this up. I've had to treat her for this, and she needed to take stress relief because of this, right? And so these are real situations, and getting that documented, having a family doctor that you can trust if the stress is that palpable, talking to your clergy could be important as well. Like if you have a trusted priest or or somebody like a nun or somebody that you talk to is really important as well. And just having all of the documentation there and really ensuring, I always advise people, unfortunately, to never put yourself in a situation where you're alone with that person, especially if they're gaslighting you, right? It is your right to never have to be alone with anybody, right? But even in a workplace or whatever else, and to be able to have HR in with you or somebody else in with you, or some form that you can actually have witnesses around you so that you feel safe is so important.
Thank you, Anila. Just 1 minute left. Anne Marie, we'll close off with you. Thank you.
Sure, absolutely. Great points from all of the speakers from before on this particular question. I just want to add one more layer to this conversation. It's the power dynamics, right? the fact that usually the person who is experiencing the racism and discrimination is not in the position of power in an organizational structure. They are one voice against many, and they're usually not the policy maker, the decision maker of the organization. So I'm going to nuance with the answer that you have to also understand whether you are ready to file a complaint. You know, are you safe, right? Or if you're going to file a complaint, is the psychological toll going to be so high that you won't come back from it? So I think first and foremost, it's about your own emotional well-being and survival. And if you are courageous enough and you have those allies and that support, go for it. Go for it, because your complaint is going to not just help you, but probably help a lot of people who will come after you. So it's not just a personal thing, but it's a social responsibility. That's sort of how I look at it.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to recognize the strength of this panel. I'm actually humbled by the strength of each of you and how great this panel was and the insight you gave to all of us. We're now going to move to closing remarks. I'm sort of sad this panel is over, but it is getting late. I'm going to pass to Max Wang, the past chairperson of the Coal Association of Canada, and Jing Hu from the Alberta Children's Hospital Foundation Council member, to provide closing remarks. And thanks for letting me moderate this panel. Oh, Max, you're on mute. Our first technical difficulty. Not bad.
Is it good now? Thank you. So first of all, Mayhan, the main organizer of this event, has asked me to apologize to you for not being here due to a family medical emergency that she needs to attend. And I'm here to provide some concluding remarks on her behalf. Hope I can do a decent job. I'll try my best. Wow. I shall say that I have attended many online meetings of different subjects over the past year. This forum is definitely outstanding, not only because of such an important subject that every one of us is facing, both as an employee and as an employer, and both as a manager and as a staff in the workplace, but also for such an exceptional and experienced panel, as so mentioned, including our Honorable Minister, Mr. Coppin of Alberta Minister and Labor and Immigration. As a former company executive and employee myself, I certainly learned a lot this evening, from government strategies to practical toolboxes. As Minister Coppin mentioned, from the historical tragedy of our residential schools to the very recent barbaric murder of a Muslim family simply because of their race or religion, racism and discrimination are a real issue we have to deal with seriously. And Mr. Coppin not only spoke passionately and eloquently in words, but also outlined Alberta government's concrete actions, such as a review of our justice system, anti-racism programs, as well as the training and the employment creation in his own department's Alberta Jobs Now program, especially for newcomers and the underprivileged, such as the disabled. Minister Coppin also stressed that diversified, inclusive, and open workplace is equally important socially. It is critical or imperative for Alberta's richness in cultural diversification and Alberta's competitiveness for the future. I definitely found these words not only heartwarming, but also visionary from a government official. Thank you so much, Mr. Coppin, Minister Coppin. Next, we heard from Dr. Sally Zhao's presentation. She outlines 6 things to do, from speaking up to self-reflection, and 6 questions to ask are all from her rich work experience in Canada and abroad, in dealing with, of course, the issues of racism and discrimination in both the workplace and the society. Of course, she also offered a suggestion for you to deal with or fight against it when you face racism or discrimination in the workplace. All her words and presentations are very succinct and practical, in my opinion. We can simply just copy and paste in our daily work and life and be useful. Now, next, I heard from Anila, Umar, Yuen. She reflected on Minister Coppin's remarks, but what struck me the most in Anila's speech is that as a racialized community member, including myself, we of course face discrimination, but we also could be subconsciously biased, including normalize certain behaviors and opinions, which is wrong. Discrimination existed as simple as the name, in her example. We could probably all reflect on that. She gave many real-life examples of different forms of racism and discriminations in the workplace we can easily miss. Finally, in her discussions, it was very interesting to hear Anila's comments or discussions on what we don't hear due to communication barriers or different formats, etc. This is the subject the business leaders and the managers could pay more attention to in the workplace. Definitely, I reflect on that. Then Anne-Marie Pham gave a very powerful presentation on a simple subject, your role and allyship. It's a new word to me, as so mentioned too. I find the word is very powerful. It's very important to build your allies in the workplace. That is, instead of being reactive or passive for others to welcome you or to include you, you can simply be proactive to find and create allies to make yourself welcome and to included. She listed different allies or forms of allies you can create for yourself. And some of these definitely have helped me in my career in Canada over the last 35 years, for sure. Anne-Marie, I think, sent a very powerful message for all of us newcomers and the visible minorities in terms of what we can do. This is even more effective than knowing how to deal with it when racism happens. He taught us how to reduce and prevent it from happening. I hope you can agree with me and practice what she mentioned, especially including willingness to listen and learn. In her words, I would say this is very useful. This is a very useful advice, both in the workplace and even at home. Of course, the Q&A session was very lively, engaging, and informative. I shall not forget about Frank's short presentation on TD Trust, leading by example of being a very diversified and open workplace, especially for newcomers. I actually personally had a positive experience in dealing with TD as well as many other companies. Thanks again for TD's support to this forum. Last, so you made an excellent moderator in introducing the panelists and facilitating the discussions. You stitched the different subjects of discussions together very well and created a very smooth flow of the program with an excellent timekeeping. Kudos to you. So finally, I think I should thank Mei Han. I know you put a lot of passion, intelligence, and hard work in organizing this program. I can declare that your creation is an outstanding success. With this, I shall hand the virtual podium to Jing Hu. I don't know, so you'll make a brief introduction, or she will take it over from here.
We can pass it directly to Jing. I've lost my timekeeping power now at 9:04. Go ahead, Jing.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Zia and Mr. Wang. Just to sum it up really briefly, I just want to thank everyone so much for coming on behalf of the organizers, COVID-19 and the Immigrant Education Society ties. And it has been such an insightful discussion that we hope to use this experience to continue it down in the future. And last, I just want to emphasize our gratitude to our guest panelists, Minister Copping, Dr. Zhao, Ms. Yuen, and Ms. Pham, and of course, our moderator and host, Mr. Zia and Mr. Zhang, and of course, our sponsors, TD Canada Bank and Frank Zhang. And thank you so much, Max, for helping to facilitate the end and sum it up. Such a wonderful summary of an overview of this great event. And I just want to, wish everyone to use this experience and reflect and to kind of be inspired from our guest panelists and, make a change in our community as well. And I think that would be a great end to today's great insightful discussion. If I missed anything, feel free to add in the chat or if you have any questions. But yeah, I think I will leave this room running for about until 9:10 if you guys have any questions, but I'll pass it back to Sol to do last and final goodbye. Thank you.
Goodbye to everyone. Yeah, thanks for the closing remarks. Thanks again to all the panelists and to all of you participating. It was a wonderful panel, and have a good evening. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much,
Yes.
Sol.
Thanks, everyone. It appears there's no more questions, just a lot of gratitude. It was fantastic. Thanks again. I'll sign off now.
Awesome. Have a great night. Take care.
Good night.
Bye, guys.